This is my first excerpt video for the year 2024, but it is far from the first video of this series. So try tuning in to my other excerpts featuring different spiritual leaders speaking about marriage, family, and community. The other videos in this series are just as family-friendly as this video aims to be, and ideally empowering. Thanks so much for tuning in. This episode of Sermon Excerpts features 2 sermons from the Reverend Al Sharpton. In 2023, there was a shooting at a Florida Dollar General, taking the lives of 3 individuals, one of which, whose memorial service was eulogized by the Reverend Al Sharpton, is named Angela Carr. And in this particular excerpts video, I am going to be taking different elements from his eulogy because he makes a lot of sense speaking about why our history is important, why it should not be banned, but instead told in its entirety, and even speculates as to how this could have been prevented if the history was properly expressed.
Saturday before last, there was a march in Washington. It was around dealing with hate crimes, voter protection, and economic justice. And as we marched, little did we know at the same time this killing was going on in Jacksonville. The same exact time that he pulled up the Dollar General, I was getting ready to stand up and speak at the march. I want you to turn to the book of Ephesians 6 and 12. It reads, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, and the rulers of the darkness, and the world, and wickedness in high places." May God add a blessing to the reading of his word. You know, as we were marching, not knowing what was going on in Jacksonville, I remember Dr. King's speech. Read the whole speech. Dr. King talked about governors whose lips were dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. I do know this governor has interposed laws that could have prevented easy access to guns for people with these kind of backgrounds. I do know that. I do know that he's tried to nullify black history and other histories in the curriculum. So I do know that I can say when I read Dr. King's words that interposition and nullification is happening right here in Florida in 2023. Now, he may have something smart to say back about me, but Governor, don't make this a fight with me and you. You can beat Mickey Mouse, but you can't beat Al Sharpton. And we together ought to be dealing with this hate. A week after this massacre, neo-Nazis marching in Orlando. They're not even being ashamed to hate no more. People going through their everyday life, shot down in front of a supermarket because of the color of their skin. Go to an HBCU. How many people have to die before you get up across, whether you're Republican or Democrat, and say we've got to stop this and we've got to bring some sanity back in this country? If we've gotten so out of bounds till we've normalized this stuff happening, look at the data. Hate crimes up. And if you speak up against it, they call you the problem. If you say we need to disarm haters, they call us the problem. There's something that bothers me, that For 2 days, maybe the national media talked about Angela, talked about the other two, and then went on to something else, like their lives didn't mean nothing. Maybe, Mr. Governor, if these people that have mental issues knew the whole story, they wouldn't be hating people that survived the worst hate in the history of this country. Maybe if you didn't take the parts of the story out that offended people, maybe they would understand that they were hating the people that were the hated. I went not long ago, took my daughters to Edgefield, South Carolina. About 7 or 8 or many years ago, a reporter came to me and said, Reverend Al, we're going to do a special. It was January of 2007. He said, we're going to do a series in the February issues of our paper on Black History Month, and we want a permission from you to do your family tree, because we're doing some known blacks family tree. I said, all right. He said, have you ever done it? I said, no. So I gave him permission to do it. He came back a week later, had another reporter with him and a photographer. I said, what's all this? He said, let me ask you something. He said, on your father's side, my father left when I was 10. I never heard from him again for 20 years. He said, how much did you know about your father's side? I said, well, I was there. My father was there till I was 10. He's a successful businessman and all that. He said, do you know his father? I said, I met my grandfather a few times. We used to go down to Wabassa, Florida, where my grandfather was. My folks was from Florida on my father's side. He said, did you know his name? I said, his name was Coleman Sharpton. He said, did you know his father's name? I said, no, I didn't know my great-grandfather. He said, well, your grandfather who you met a few times, his name was Coleman Sharpton Jr. His father was Coleman Sharpton Sr., and his father was a slave in Edgefield, South Carolina. Here is a copy of the papers where when his slave owner died, her widow made a deal for indentured servitude to a plantation in Florida. And that's how your grandfather was born in Florida, and your folks come from there. But Coleman Sharpton Sr., your great-grandfather, was from Edgefield. He says, and ironically, the plantation he was on was bought by a collector. It's almost the way it was. And I flew down there, Press was with us, and I walked around this plantation that my great-grandfather used to be a slave at. So several years later, I decided a few weeks ago to bring my daughters, and they're still there the same way. We got over to the First Baptist Church, which was the white church. And in parts of the country, they have a cemetery, Newman, extending from the church. And as you walk in the cemetery, First Baptist Church in Edgefield, about a third of the cemeteries was Sharptons and Thurmans, because Alexander Sharpton, who owned my grandfather, was married to Strom Thurman's cousin, and they all buried their ancestors together. And it never occurred to me until then that Sharpton was not the name of my great-grandfather. Sharpton was the ownership papers on my great-grandfather. I don't know my name. I'm named after my great-grandfather's owners. His name was Alexander Sharpton. And Ashley, my daughter who's with me today, stood there at the cemetery looking at Alexander's tombstone and said, he was the first Al Sharpton. Maybe if you didn't edit that out of the curriculum, maybe if you let people in Florida know that every time a black American writes their name, they're writing the ownership that their forefathers had to go through. Maybe if you told the whole story, people would not be hating us. They'd be grateful that God brought us from a mighty long way.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That boy may have had his mental problems, but what put that hate in his heart? What put in him that black folks was the folks he wanted to shoot. And in the way that they learned that, they need to unlearn it. Which is why we don't need no edited, watered down history. Tell the whole story. Don't rewrite the story. Reason why our churches are so strong is we came through so much. And we know that it wasn't man that brought us through, it was God. In the midst of our sorrow, it was God. In the midst of our pain, it was God. When we didn't know our names, when we didn't know where our relatives was, God brought us through. Don't reduce, don't edit, don't fix my story. Tell the whole story. We didn't come down here to fight DeSantis. We didn't come down here to fight Republicans. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. It's deeper than that. It's principalities, powers of the darkness, spiritual wickedness. It's wicked to know people's story and won't tell the story. It's wicked to start culture wars in a divided country. It's wicked for us to tell our young black men and women to don't be criminal and don't shoot up Jacksonville and get rid of these guns, yet you'll take a man with 91 felonies and 4 cases and say he ought to be the president of the United States. It's wicked. Everything this country taught us, you're trying to undo. But some of us are going to stand up for what's right. Some of us can take your blows and keep on fighting, because there is a God that'll give us strength. There's a God that'll give us comfort. And your arms are too short to box with God. We have got to get past being divided for the dividers and celebrate in the midst of this misery a God that gives us life. And what gives me the strength, I had a pastor who was my mentor, Reverend William A. Jones. And I remember Reverend Jones told the story. He was ill, and this was before his passing, about 4 or 5 years, but he had gotten so ill. And I came to see him. He said, you know, Al, I got so ill one night, I kind of woke up in a daze. And I looked up, and it was this image in my room I never seen before. And I figured out, because it was dark, I thought death had come in my room. He said, I've been preaching so long that I talked to myself and said, try to talk death out of taking you. He says, so I tried to strike up a conversation. I said, Death, how long you been on the job? He said, Death didn't answer me, kept moving to my bed. He said, I tried again. I said, Death, do you ever feel guilty about the work you do? You've separated mothers from their children and fathers from their loved ones. You've taken couples that have been married 60 years and divided them. Do you ever feel bad about the work you've done? He said, Death didn't answer me. He got now to the tip of the bed. He said, I tried one last time. I said, Death, have you ever made a mistake? In all these centuries, have you ever made a mistake? He said, Death stopped then for the first time. And Death looked down at me and said, you know, Jones, in all these centuries, I've been out here a long time. In fact, I've been out here since the beginning of time. I took out Adam and Eve. I've taken out kings and queens, and I've taken out servants. I've taken out the rich. I've taken out the poor. I've taken out the famous, and I've taken out the unknowns. But in all these centuries, I've only made one mistake. It was about 2,000 years ago. They sent me up a hill called Calvary. And when I got up that hill, there were 3 men hanging there. And I reached out and I grabbed the one on the left. and I took him with me. I came back and I grabbed the one on the right, and I took him with me. But then I made my mistake. I came back and I grabbed the one in the middle. And when I grabbed him, he grabbed me back. And we started wrestling, we started fighting, we started rumbling all over that mountain. I fought him for 3 long days. But after 3 days, I had to let him go. I never did get that man from Calvary. I come by Bethel to tell you today, I'm not afraid of no big governor. I'm not afraid of no politician. I work for the man in the middle of Calvary. He promised he'd never leave me. He promised he wouldn't forsake us. He promised he'd be on our side. He walks with me. He talks with me. He tells me I'm his own. Yes, yes, yes.
If you'd like to see this eulogy, as well as the memorial service in its entirety, it is entitled Memorial Service for Dollar General Shooting Victim Angela Carr, September 8, 2023. Second sermon excerpt featuring Reverend Al Sharpton.
You can't tell me about my mess. I know more of my mess than you do. But God can take your mess and turn it into a message. In fact, if God only used perfect people, we would think their perfections is what made it. But if God can take somebody that's messed up, somebody that's been smeared and criticized and dragged through the mud, if he can take them and lift them up and clean them off and stand them up, you know only God could have done that. So God is saying in this text, I brought you out. I put you on the land of the Midianites. I put you in the land that wasn't yours and told you don't worship their gods, and you have lost your way. But I'm going to deliver you despite you. Sound familiar? We got delivered. Our great-grandparents were slaves. And we've lost our way. Rather than celebrate how far we come, even though we got a long way to go, we've turned our back on the values that brought us here. Was a time we were singing with Aretha Franklin respect. Now we calling our women hoes and bees. You've lost your way. We used to sing black and proud. Now we call each other niggas in public. You've lost your way. I brought you out of bondage and you've turned your back on me. The only thing you had coming out of slavery that you owned was your church. Your black banks came out the church. Your black colleges come out the church. But now that I done given you some blessings, you got a degree now. You're a member of the country club. You don't want to come to my church no more. You've lost your way. You've lost your mind. You forgot how you got where you are.
For more information on this sermon excerpt, entitled Stop Hiding, Judges chapter 6, verses 6 through 12, spoken at Lilly Grove Missionary Baptist Church by Reverend Al Sharpton. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned for more.